Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. The relationship between India and United States has reached new heights in the last several years, and especially so in the past 1 year, ever since the NDA government has taken over. The visit of US President Barack Obama in January to India has laid the grounds for further propulsion in the relationships. The Defence Framework Agreement signed in 2005 between the two countries had, however, floundered during the last couple of years of the UPA-II government. However, it has found a new momentum in the recent past. Today, US Secretary of Defence Ashton Carter is visiting India and has already met the Defence Minister Manohar Parrikar and will be meeting the Prime Minister among others. He will be signing to renew the Defence Framework Agreement for another 10 years. The US House of Representatives has also endorsed deepening of the defence cooperation with India last month. The US sees its Secretary's visit as part of its focus on rebalancing its interests in Asia. Also, this renewal of the agreement would see furthering of the Defence Trade and Technology Initiative. Today, we will look at what all this means and where the India-US defence cooperation is heading and what would it mean to the entire region and India's own interests in it. To discuss this, I have with me Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States, Ajay Lele, research fellow at the Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis, Chintamani Mahapatra, chairman of US, Canadian and Latin American Studies at the JNU, and Nitin Gokhale, senior fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation. Welcome to all of you. Meera Shankar, how important is this visit of the...
I think it's a very important visit. It builds on the agreements reached during the visit of President Barack Obama in January this year. And the whole field of defense cooperation has emerged as an important area of cooperation between India and the United States. You know, we had this defense framework agreement of 2005, which was valid for 10 years. And now we propose to renew it for another 10 years, and there will be additional features in it. I think, while the defense framework agreement laid out a framework for institutional dialogue between the forces of the two sides, between the defense ministries of the two sides, and for joint training and so on. I think new areas of cooperation have been opened up in recent years in terms of purchase of defense equipment, which till about 3-4 years ago was virtually negligible, and now we have bought equipment worth $9 billion, primarily transport aircraft and maritime surveillance aircraft.
When you're saying that 4-5 years back this was negligible, or also analysts have been saying that, why did this whole thing flounder in the last few years of the UK?
Well, I don't think it floundered in the last few years. This was a historic kind of situation where India did not really approach the US for defense equipment and technology, and the US also was reluctant to give defense equipment and technology to India because they perceived us as being closer to the then Soviet Union. And India also had reservations on account of the US policy of not transferring technology, not licensing production in India, and also the use of pressure through withholding spares in times of crisis.
So would you say that the nuclear agreement, the nuclear deal actually opened up doors for all these things?
I think to some extent, yes, it did. But I think there was also a logic in terms of India's own relook at its policies, where we wanted to maximize our options in terms of the sources of supply, and we also wanted to lay emphasis on indigenization of production. Now, what is new is not only the purchase, but the fact that the US has upgraded India's status as a country for defense technology transfer and exports. When I went there, we were, even though this was after the nuclear deal, we were on par with Sudan in terms of the level at which trust and confidence was there. And then very difficult procedures applied. When I left, they had upgraded India to the status of closest partner, on par with their closest partner, which is just one step below that of an ally, because we are not an ally. So this was a substantial upgrading. Then you also had the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative, where for the first time, the US talked of transfer of technology, joint development, joint research, and going well beyond a buyer-seller relationship. Now, we've taken some tentative steps to materialize this Defense Technology and Trade Initiative, because during the visit of President Obama, 4 pilot projects, if you will, were agreed upon. And though these are not, very sophisticated or huge projects, nevertheless, it's a significant first step. And these include cooperation in unmanned aerial vehicles, in special equipment for transport aircraft, mobile electric power sources. But the two sides also agreed beyond these 4 pilot projects to discuss and explore the possibility of cooperating with regard to aircraft carriers and jet fighter.
Okay, Ajay, how far have we gone? What this renewal of the agreement now and the DTII, that DTTI and all this. And also the most important thing what Meera Shankar was talking about, why it was not so important as earlier, or why we were not interested, because indigenization factor was also one of the... How far are they going on these matters?
I think one must look back. This is a process in making. There was a huge technological appetite, if I may use that word, in the beginning of after India did Pokhran 1, Pokhran 2, and the aftermath of that. So after 2005 Indo-US nuclear deal, the things have started easing out. But if you really look at the timeline, only around 2011-12, US had taken out 4 to 5 major, I can say, the agencies of DRDO and ISRO out of the particular list, where they were not being allowed to transfer the technology or manage the spare parts. So after that, only things have started moving up. Now today, if you see, he started his visit from Visakhapatnam. So basically, maritime security becomes an important element into this entire deal. Then now we are looking at getting engines for your Tejas aircraft also. That is also going to be a very huge, significant step. Then there are a few other areas where we are going to collaborate, where we are looking for particularly the clothing to fight against the biological, chemical and nuclear attacks, so on and so forth. We are looking at creating some sort of, one can say, transformation systems for many other defense equipments also. From that perspective, I think these are the steps in making. We had 2 to 3 visits. Before Obama's visit in 2012, we had Mr. Hegel visiting. Before that, you had Panata's visit also. So there's a process in making. Every person has contributed substantially in the way the things were there. But the things were slightly amorphous at that point in time. Now I think some finality is coming up.
You said that this particular defense secretary, who is Ashton Carter, is supposed to be, having been there for a long time, having
2012 agreement was, in fact, he was the basic architect.
He was a deputy defense secretary
at that point in time.
So, now he seems to have much more powers than most other people were there. So, he's coming here, and you think that he will be able to get things which were still stuck in this thing. I've been reading that, he has so much powers that except a few things that he can decide on most of the things.
I think he should be able to get it. But the other factor also one must understand, we need to have a matchable ecosystem, industrial base in India also. So we may have certain amount of agreements.
Keep on talking of indigenization, but whether we have that kind of ecosystem.
That is what is more important.
I think also, because most of the technologies are privately held in the US, they are owned by companies.
So it's not a government.
Therefore, the question is, to what extent the companies would be willing to part with technology or collaborate. We have to feel our way forward.
Okay.
GE is going to be basically doing the deal with your aero engines. So definitely one has to engage them.
That is the engine which was selected for Tejas several years ago, in fact, while I was there.
Professor Mahapatra, apart from these, nitty-gritties of which technology and things like that, the larger issue, it is very interesting that, the US is saying that the defense secretary's visit to India, and I think he came from Vietnam or Singapore. He was in Singapore and he came here. They're talking of rebalancing their interests and focus in Asia. What does it mean?
This is a very critical time for the world, for Asia and for the United States. When the Americans were too busy in Afghanistan and Iraq, the Chinese actually galloped in terms of their economic achievement, and China emerged as a true power only in the midst of American war against terrorism. And suddenly the US realized that it was losing its position and influence in Asia. China had become the #1 trading partner of most of the American allies in Asia. So in 2011, Barack Obama talked about rebalancing strategy towards Asia. Initially, they talked about pivot to Asia. Then they changed the nomenclature to rebalance to Asia. And the US looks at India as an important element of the entire rebalancing strategy in Asia. In fact, it is not only the American embassy which says that it is part of the rebalancing strategy. If you see what Ashton Carter said in Singapore and then in Vietnam, then you realize that there is a connection. Vietnam, which was an enemy country for a long time, Ashton Carter is the first defense secretary to visit Vietnam, and the American Navy held a very small-scale exercise in the Da Nang military base, which was actually manned by the Americans during the Vietnam War. So slowly, they're building up the strategy in such a way that the existing alliances will be strengthened, new partnership will be strengthened. New partners are India and Vietnam, and the existing alliances are, of course, with Australia and Japan and South Korea. And the main challenge comes from China. And at the moment, it appears things are happening in South China Sea in such a way. The game of chicken between the American Navy and the Chinese Navy, the Japanese aircraft and the Chinese aircraft is really frightening. And China very recently said that if the Americans don't stop their surveillance of Chinese territory, it might lead to confrontation. And the Americans are saying the same thing. So in the backdrop of this larger picture, when you talk about Indo-US defense cooperation, it is much more than the defense deal, much more than the co-production and co-development, and it is much more than transactional relationship between the two countries.
Right.
So I think India has to decide the larger picture, keeping the larger picture in mind, and not just talk about military exercises and mutual visits of officers and things like that.
Absolutely. Nitin, would you agree with him? Would you agree with him that it's a larger picture, there's a larger game being involved when US talks of rebalance? How does India, or how do you think India will have to approach this?
Well, I think I agree with him largely. I want to say one thing, that if India plays it smart, and India can become what I call the swing power, India is in a unique position to play both sides. It can play US, it can play China. You saw Prime Minister Modi going to China and being wooed and being, given the red carpet welcome there, not just because China wants to engage India bilaterally, but because it knows that if China does not want India to go into the US fold or become closer to US, then it must keep India engaged. Similarly, US does not want India and China to really come closer or have cooperation. They want them to be competitors, and therefore US is propagating this, what I call the coalition of values. Japan, US, Australia, Singapore, India, they're all coming together. And remember, India's geographical position is unique. In a way, US rebalance hinges on how India plays out, how the Indian Navy and how the Indian forces, Indian strategic position, strategic thought plays out in South China Sea as well as in the Indian Ocean. And therefore, Carter's visit to Eastern Naval Command in Vizag yesterday is a good indicator that the US is looking for Indian Navy's larger role in South China Sea as well as in the Indian Ocean to contain what they think is the rapid rise of the Chinese Navy. That's the larger picture. But even between India and US, there are wrinkles. I mean, it's been an on and off relationship. Tactically, they've played it very well. They've been, I think India does the largest number of military exercises with the US. But when it comes to acquiring technology, there are reservations on the US side, mainly as the ambassador said, because it's privately held, but also because India has refused so far to sign those foundational agreements,
right,
which are mandatory under the US law to transfer the high technology or the state-of-the-art technology. So therefore, we are at a very crucial and I would think very interesting phase in Indo-US defense relationship as well as strategic relationship. Right now, we are tactical as far as defense relationship is concerned. The next step would be to take it to strategic level. But for that, those 4 pathfinder agreements or the pilot projects, they need to be concluded successfully. Only then we can think of big projects.
Okay. Meera, the other thing is that the larger issue again,
sure.
Playing the both sides, what Professor Mahapatra was talking about, Nitin also talking about India playing both sides, that balance that which we need to strike. You think that we are on the right track on that, and what are the impediments there? If we are not careful.
Well, I think, if I may put it like this, that if India as an autonomous actor strengthens its security, its capacity to deter any adventurism by a large neighbor, then in that sense, we help to shape a more sustainable Asian balance. So irrespective of whether we are part of the US rebalance or not, I think that there are steps which we may take autonomously to strengthen our presence in the Indian Ocean region, to strengthen our capacity to defend our borders, to deter, and all that would in itself help to shape a better balance where I think both India and in which both India and the US would have an interest.
How easy is that in the context of the kind of pressure that the US is apparently putting on us, because they want us to play that balancing role in their problems with China, and how is this all going to play out in the in the medium term, if not in the long term?
I think the US also has very intense dialogue with China, and they have very extensive economic ties with China, though you do see a sharpening of competition and
what Professor Mahapatra was talking about, some alarming situation developing in the South China Sea.
Yes.
So, how do we ensure that we don't get caught into that kind of a situation?
I think we are not really a player in the South China Sea so far.
May I say something?
Yeah,
so, of course, we have relations with Vietnam, and we also have some interests in oil exploration there.
Right.
But we are not a direct party. What we have said is that we support the principles of international law, including freedom of navigation in the South China Sea or in any other waters.
Any other maritime.
So that is a universally accepted principle, which we would expect all countries in the region to adhere to.
Yes, Professor Mahapatra?
President of India goes to Vietnam and makes a joint statement in which the freedom of navigation and the high seas, including in South China Sea, was mentioned. Now, Ashton Carter goes to Vietnam and issues a similar statement with Vietnam. Now, I would say that India is playing a smart game. India does not want to be a swing state either with America or with China. That is the reason Narendra Modi, in spite of a lot of differences with China, goes to China, strikes some kind of compromises, about $30 billion business deal, 24 agreements, and comes back. And at the same time, he's trying to improve ties with the United States on very many areas, including defense and security. So I agree with the ambassador when he used a very nice word, autonomous. India would rather become an autonomous center of power than become a swing state either here or there. And I think this government is doing the game, I'm playing the game very well.
Okay. Ajay, Nitin was talking about this Pathfinder projects and things like that. How far have they come? You think that, he was saying that how important it is for those projects to be successfully concluded for any further movement in this relationship as far as the defense cooperation is concerned.
Would
you agree with that?
Yeah, I entirely agree with him, because you see, these projects are still at a drawing board stage, if I may say so. It all started in 2012 with the DIIT initiative.
DTI.
But subsequently it so happened that things had not picked up the momentum. Right now what is important is that to pick up the momentum. Particularly when he was in Vizag, Mr. Carter, he held the second meeting of joint development of an aircraft carrier Vishal. So definitely now things are moving into a right direction. I think India or Indian Navy has given him certain amount of a briefing on what is India's perceived doctrine into this region and why India perceives that they require an aircraft carrier and how a joint development can take place. But these are all things which will take significant amount of time. We know from the experience of Gokhale that even to repair an aircraft carrier takes so much amount of a time. So forget about building an aircraft carrier right from scratch. So it's going to take time. The other interesting project is particularly about, they call it as roll-off, roll-on model on your aircrafts, the C-130. So what we are planning to do is that we want to create certain amount of structures in our country where you can change the role of the aircraft very frequently. That means you can use this transport aircraft for military purposes, either as a hospital or as a paradropping aircraft or for intelligence gathering. So we are interested into developing these technologies. The other aspect is looking at aero engines. We all know that India's defense industry, particularly the aerospace industry, has got huge limitation because we just don't produce engines. So if a deal is struck over there, but it's not transfer of information, it should be a transfer of technology. Otherwise, usually what happens is that people give you a certain amount of pamphlets, give certain amount of information, but when it comes to hardcore technology transfer, the joint development has to take place in true sense of a joint development.
Absolutely.
Then only the things will move further. And there are other interesting projects where we are looking at developing jointly smaller UAVs. These UAVs have been successful into Afghanistan and Iraq, particularly the US has used them. Even a battalion level, those UAVs can be used. They are backpack UAVs. So all these things are definitely exciting from the perspective of Indian defense industry and Make in India also.
Okay.
But we need to have an ecosystem for that.
Okay, Nitin, we are talking of what would be good for India,
Yes.
But I'm sure that they have come with their own, package of demands or package of what they expect from us. What is it that we can offer to them? One, I'm told, the Americans are very interested in some kind of a joint defense exercise in Malabar, which we see with Japan being included. Yes. Is this something which we can offer to them?
No, Malabar is an old exercise. It's, I think, one of the largest. It's a joint exercise which Japan is also now included. There is a proper agreement. In fact, in 2000...
last time it was not done.
Yes, not done, but they will do it, I'm sure, because 2007 they had done a 5-nation exercise that time. You had Australia, you had Japan, you had Singapore, India and US. And it was near the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean, and the Chinese had protested very vehemently. In fact, they sent a démarche that time. After that, India has not gone on for that, and the US has also kept away.
That is exactly the point.
That's where I think this triangular relationship comes in. Although Professor Mahapatra said that India should, as even the ambassador said that we should be autonomous, certainly we are autonomous. And I think India has actually held back quite a bit by not going fully into the US fold or not, annoying China too much. But certainly at certain levels in Indian Ocean, India will have to cooperate with US. And US would like India to play a larger role because...
But how much, exactly, the question is how much larger role are we willing to play? No. Meera?
I think, we have a shared interest. Yes. It's not that our interests diverge in terms of maritime security in the Indian Ocean. So where we have a shared interest, it is in our interest to coordinate, cooperate. Absolutely. If you look at the international community, for instance, they have been working closely together to handle the issue of piracy. There is an international coalition, and India has been cooperating with that international coalition in terms of handling piracy off the coast of Africa. So I think that there are certainly avenues for cooperation because our interests in many of these areas converge. After all, both India and the US have good relations with China, don't seek a conflict with China.
No, nobody is seeking a conflict.
No, but at the same time, we would also like to shape a balance which ensures that China's rise is not threatening to peace and security in Asia. So it's a more complex situation.
You see, if you look at the talk given by Mr. Carter at Shangri-La Dialogue, he has categorically said that China is really crossing the limit.
Yes,
because he has made a mention that China is creating artificial islands into the region. and that is increasing particularly the confrontationist attitude. So definitely I think India could play a role over here where they can in fact try to bring some certain amount of a peace between US and Chinese attitude also in Indian Ocean region. Idea is not to create certain amount of a confrontationist attitude over there because the place is too huge. All of us can live very happily over here if we don't unnecessarily entangle with each other's interests.
Yeah.
There is an interesting development in the last 72 hours. The Chinese have told India that you do not have the freedom to come and explore without our permission in Vietnam on the oil blocks there. India has not reacted. India has actually officially, publicly at least, has not reacted to it. Because like we have been saying that at the moment India does not have a large role to play in South China Sea. But if things come to a crunch, perhaps all the other nations will gang up against China, and that's what China does not want and does not intend that to be happening. So therefore, I think we live in a very interesting time that everyone is cooperating with each other. There are multilateral forums, there are bilateral forums, there are bilateral relationships and interest, and it's a kind of a mix of threats, competition, and cooperation happening everywhere. So Asia is the most interesting place, and that's why US wants to be a part of that Asian
balance,
which is happening
around there. Yeah, Professor Mahapatra,
I just want to add one thing here, that Chinese behavior in the South China Sea has been provocative.
Right.
So I think when we are talking of provocation, we have to see what China has done on the ground. Actually, they've sought to change the realities on the ground by occupying islands, by reclaiming land, and therefore pushing their claims for an exclusive economic zone and territorial waters without concern for the claims of other countries.
Professor Mahapatra, very quickly. So these are the issues which will have to be taken into consideration when India deals with the United States and what they think that we should be doing with them.
Just two quick points. Let us remind ourselves that when Prime Minister Narendra Modi went to Washington DC, there was a joint statement issued for the first time. For the first time, India and the US put in the joint statement their respective concerns over the problems of freedom of navigation in South China Sea. And then when Obama came to India in January, yet again, in the joint vision statement for the Asia Pacific, the same South China Sea issue was put there. But the main thing is not just South China Sea and what is happening right now. It is going to fizzle out in the near future. Something is going to happen. There is not going to be any war. The real big picture is, here is an established power which is relatively declining, and here is a new power which is ascending as a potential superpower, and lots of competition between the two powers are going on in spite of close cooperation between the two. And how to walk the diplomatic tightrope is a big challenge for India.
Okay. I think on that note, we need to end. Diplomatic tightrope walking. Meera Shankar, I'm sure, knows a lot about it. And as far as the defense cooperation is concerned, again, there seems to be need for some kind of a tightrope walk for India. We'll wait and watch how all these fascinating developments will take place. Thanks to all my guests. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue in the big picture same time tomorrow.